Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Hi everybody, my name's Leo and I'm an alcoholic. And I've heard a lot about this meeting, and all the things that I heard about it seem to be so true, that it's so alive and there's so many things going on. It's a pleasure to be here from Long Beach, California, to be amongst you. You probably gathered by my accent that I'm from England, where men are men and sheep are nervous. And a long time ago, I think it was George Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw said that America and England are two countries that are divided by a common language. And what he meant by that is very often, sometimes you'll use a word or you'll use a phrase which means something very different for us. And this was brought forcibly home for me when I came to live in Long Beach, California, over 5 years ago now. And I had to go to my Episcopal church to go and say Mass. And an old lady had parked her car in front of the garage where I lived. So I had to spend some time trying to find her to get her to move the car, which I did. And then I got into my car and drove to the church. But I was a few minutes late. And so I felt that I owed the congregation an apology. So being new to the United States, I did it in the way I would do in England. I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry that I'm late, but I had to knock up an old lady before I came to church." The congregation responded very much like you. Except I'm pleased to say there was an increase in old ladies at church the following Sunday. You know, every country has its famous trunks. Every country has its famous trunks. You have D. Martin. Well, years ago we had Winston Churchill. And I don't know whether many of you know, but good old Winston, Winnie as he was called, Winston used to drink about a bottle of brandy a day. Now, whether he was an alcoholic or not is not for me to say. But there are some stories told about Winston, which I can certainly identify with. There's a lovely story that Winston Churchill was sitting at dinner with Lady Astor. And Lady Astor turned to Winston Churchill and said, "Winnie! Winnie, you're drunk." Winston Churchill looked at her in his inimitable way and said, "Madame, you are ugly. But I shall wake up sober in the morning." She was quick to say to him, she said, "Winnie, Winnie, if I was your wife, I'd put poison in your soup." "Madame, if I was your husband, I'd drink it." And I suppose that it's not unusual for you here in Mesa to have a speaker tell a few jokes. But I think that the jokes that I've told are more than just funny. I think they reveal something about the disease. In fact, I think really that any joke that's told about the alcoholic reveals something of the disease. In Winston, you hear the denial, the manipulation, how you switch the focus of attention from yourself to somebody else. I did it, and I'm pretty sure that you did it. And yet there's a sense in AA when what we do is we take responsibility for our lives. And perhaps part of the whole thing of the spiritual program, which I'll get to, is that we are responsible. Now, please understand me, we're not responsible for being alcoholic. But we are responsible about what we do about it. And there's a lovely story which, in one level, it doesn't even seem as though it has anything to do with why we're here tonight, and yet I believe it does. And when I heard the story, it struck me so forcibly that this is why we meet, and why there are alcoholics meeting all over the United States tonight. It's the story of a little Jewish girl in Nazi Germany in 1937. And she has to attend a Nazi school. And one morning she's going to school and she has a smile on her face. And the Nazi school teacher sees her coming into school with this smile on her face, and he says, "Hey, Jew, why are you smiling?" And the little Jewish girl says, "My cats had kittens, and they're all Nazis." The teacher thinks this would be very good for propaganda. And so he telephones Heinrich Himmler, and he says, "Himmler, got a Jewish girl here, says that her cats had kittens, and they're all Nazis. Why don't we film her and use her for propaganda?" So 7 weeks later, Himmler comes with the SS to the school and makes the Jewish girl stand in front of the whole school like I'm standing here tonight. And Himmler says to the Jew, "Jew, tell me the story about the cat and the kittens." The little Jewish girl looks at him and says, "My cat had kittens. And they're all social democrats." Heinrich Himmler's furious. "That's not the story I heard," he said. And then the little Jewish girl says it. She says, "It's for you." And she says, "It's for me." She says, "My cat had kittens." Oh, and they were all Nazis. But then their eyes were opened. And I believe that that's why we're here tonight. We're here to have our eyes open so that we can see. See in a way we've never seen before. See in a way we've never seen before. Not only who we are, but what we need. You see, there are many people out there in California and Arizona, probably all over the world, who know that they're alcoholic, but they don't know what they need. We know what we need. We need this program. We need these steps. We need the traditions that have brought recovery to really now, countless millions of people if you include all the 12-step programs that exist. And it's really very simple. And it's what I'm going to do tonight. And as I say, what many people all over the place are doing tonight. They say what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And really, if it's a speaker meeting or a step meeting or a step study meeting, or even somebody on a 12-step call, it's the same. You kind of remember that you see. And you also see what you need. I'll work tonight. But in a way, you're not spectators. Because you'll be working too. It'll be my story. Many of it took place in England. I'm a priest. But it really doesn't make any difference. The faces change, the places change, the situations change, but it's the same disease. It's the disease of a terrible loneliness and an isolation, of seeking for something outside to make us feel good inside. And today, thank God, none of us need to do that anymore. I started to drink when I was 15 or 16 in England, in a school. They used to give us beer at school before we went to sleep. And I can remember that it wasn't so much that I liked the taste, and it wasn't so much that I got drunk. But it was I liked how I felt when I drank. I remember that. I thought I'd found a friend. I thought I'd found a friend. I had two things really. I had asthma and I had a stammer when I was 12, 13, and 14, and people kind of made fun of me. I suppose in a way that's probably why I've kind of become a little bit of a comedian, because the only way to deal with people who make fun of you is to kind of get them on your side. So even before I ever drank, I learned how to people please. But with alcohol, I found something that made me feel good. And for a short time, it was to do that. It made me feel stronger. It made me feel more confident. I'm 5'7". 5'8" on a very good day. But when I drank alcohol, I felt 6'2". I kind of felt bigger. And as I say, I kind of liked how I felt when I drank. You know, there are some people, and I heard them when they were talking about being here, they talked about being alcoholic or addicts. I'm really probably pure, almost pure alcoholic. I really didn't use other drugs. That's not completely true. I smoked marijuana twice. Once I got an erection, the second time I got a headache. I think if it would have been the other way around, I might have continued to use it. But my drug of choice really was alcohol. My drug of choice was really alcohol, and that's what I used. And in 1971, after going through a number of very good universities in England, in 1971, I was ordained in Durham Cathedral in the very north of England. And I was let loose on a parish. And you know, like, you kind of have to have an excuse. You kind of like to have an excuse for why you're drinking as much as you're drinking. Well, I kind of had an excuse too. I used to say to other priests who I was living with at the time in this big house where all the priests lived in the parish, I kind of said, you know, the lost and the lonely, those sheep without a shepherd, I know where they are. They're all in the bars. Now, that was really just a lot of bullshit, quite frankly, just to get there. And I kind of had to have a reason to get in the bars, because I liked to drink, and I wanted to drink. And I suppose by that time, I was 23 years of age, I kind of needed to drink. I didn't want to admit that. And it wasn't obvious yet, because as you know, it's a progressive disease. And I know that there are some people and some speakers who will say, right from the very first drink, they were having kind of alcoholic problems. With me, there were a number of years of the progression of the disease, but by the time I was ordained, the problems were coming. And I kind of wanted to drink and needed to drink, although I wasn't talking about that. But now, with hindsight, I see that. Now, if you walk into a bar dressed like this, people notice you. There's a walking oil slick just come in. There's a penguin at the end of the bar. Hey, you know, and everybody wants to talk to a priest. Even if they don't like you, they want to tell you. And people came over to me, I can remember some of the things they used to say. One person came over to me and said, Father Leo, do you think that Jesus Christ was a spaceman? I kind of said, well, you keep buying the drinks and we'll talk about it. One person said to me, do you think the Virgin Mary really is a virgin? You can't know everybody that well. Father Leo, what do you think about the pill? When I took the pill, it gave me diarrhea. And I kind of worked real hard at trying to get them on my side. And you know, because I don't think I'm the only one who can say this here. There's a time, and it's, you know, when the big book says the disease of alcoholism is cunning, baffling, and powerful, you know, it really is. You know, if it was that easy to get it, so many of us wouldn't have suffered for so long. It really is cunning, baffling, and powerful, as we know it's patient. But, you know, the situation for me was I could point to a period in time, when my drinking seemed to work for me. It kind of seemed to bring a certain amount of success with my parish work. Because people kind of liked a priest who was drinking with them. And kind of talking and drinking and then going back to parties, doing all the things that they did. In fact, they said that. Father Leo, you're the kind of priest we like. Jesus would be proud of you. You know, because you're not like one of these snobby priests. I mean, you come where the people are. You drink like we drink. You talk like we talk. You vomit like we vomit. And people started going from the bars to the church. Well, my congregation increased. One woman put it very succinctly to her husband. She said, shall we stay at home and listen to Benny Hill, or shall we go to church and listen to Father Leo? Same thing's going to be happening. And it was. So my congregation increased. So I kind of, you know, with the other priests and things like that, I could see this was all part of the mission, all part of the kind of evangelization that was going on. And it seemed to show fruit. And then a kind of disastrous thing happened to me, which I can see now, which probably happened to many of you. At a young age, too young, 27, I was made a parish priest. That's like a big P. You have little P's working for you, you know, other priests working for you, but you're the big honcho. And I was too young for that. I was too young for the responsibility. And you know, you talk about ego and you talk about arrogance, and at some level all of us are still grappling with it, even in our sobriety. But it came so apparent that I wasn't ready for that. There was success, but it really was a very superficial success. And what happened then was that within a year, I'd lost it. It's really incredible because I don't know how many of you can identify with this, but when things started to go wrong, when things eventually started to go wrong, my word, it was like a real downhill slip. And within a year, I kind of lost it. I only had one Christmas in that parish. I drunk myself out of it. Now, to try and talk about it is the kind of thing that we're here tonight about, to share. A whole lot of things were going on. Just like many of you, I had the blackouts. Had the times when I couldn't remember what I'd said. I couldn't remember what I did. I couldn't remember where I'd been. Wasn't much point being there. Couldn't remember it. Couldn't remember where I'd left the car. And there was something else that was really happening to me too. That personality change that we talk about and we read about. I kind of became worse at some point. I'm not really an aggressive person physically, although I certainly did some of that. But I could be verbally. And there was that kind of line that you cross over when you're kind of having a good time and people seem to be happy and you seem to be nice and you seem to be friendly, and then you kind of change. And you get real sarcastic. And you kind of say things that you don't mean, or you say things that, quite frankly, are really inappropriate. And sometimes you do things like that, and then afterwards you can't remember, or if you do remember, you feel so ashamed. I suppose that's what we mean when we talk about the kind of Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. And it's real interesting, you know, because that story of the Jekyll and Hyde syndrome is so relevant to us. I suppose that's why so many people, particularly the codependents, very often turn around and say, you know, you're just like Jekyll and Hyde. Because that's how we kind of were. And Jekyll and Hyde, if you remember, Jekyll and Hyde was basically a good person, just like we are. But he kind of, when he used this potion, became a very evil, destructive person. And if you look at the story, he never knew what he did when he was Mr. Hyde. If you ever read that story again by Robert Louis Stevenson, he never kind of knew what he did when he was Mr. Hyde. Either people told him about it or he read about it in the newspapers about this man Hyde. The other thing is, and it's real interesting when you think about it, he had to drink the potion. Which is real interesting. You know, in the book it talks about him drinking it. The other thing is, which was certainly true for so many of us, certainly was true for me, he thought he was in control. He thought that, you know, he only became Mr. Hyde, or he'd only become Mr. Hyde when he took the potion. And then one day that line was crossed. And I suppose everybody in this room, that's why we're here, the line's crossed. When one day he's out with his fiancée and they're planning to get married, and he places his arm around her and they're talking about the marriage plans. And when he looks down, he sees that it's not his hand. It's Mr. Hyde's hand. And he hasn't taken the potion. Now who's in control? Mr. Hyde's coming out at times he never expected. The powerlessness and the unmanageability. And the tragedy of that story is that the Mr. Hyde, the alcoholic personality, if you like, destroyed him, killed him. Now that would be a real kind of interesting story and a real interesting analogy, except for one thing. It was written by this man, Robert Louis Stevenson. And I don't know whether you know, but Robert Louis Stevenson was an alcoholic. I think it's probably the first story that's really written about alcoholism, you know, from the writer, without the word alcoholism or alcohol ever being mentioned. And that's why so many of us, and I suppose the addict too with other drugs, can identify with that Jekyll and Hyde character. That's how I was. It's not a proud thing to say, but you know, I kind of very often hit, abused my mother, my father, my friends, and kind of forced people. You know, when I look back, even with the amends that I've tried to make in the program, so many people that I lost on the way. So many, and I say lost, but perhaps I don't really mean lost. What I really mean is that with my alcoholism, I kind of threw them away. I threw them away. There were the wet beds, not often talked about, but for me, that was part of the unmanageability. Those wet beds, that afterwards you somehow or other try and dry those damn sheets. And it's so hard to try and do it without anyone knowing. Because when I wet, I wet. All of that. I kind of found myself with people I wouldn't normally be with. Saying and doing things. Slowly getting lost. And then there were, you know, and I've always said it, because if you're an alcoholic and you're a typist, you're going to get eventually drunk in the office. And if you're an alcoholic and you drive a truck, there's going to be times you're going to be drunk in your truck. And if you're a doctor or a surgeon and you're alcoholic, there's going to be a time you're going to be drunk in the hospital. And if you're a priest and an alcoholic, there's going to be times you're drunk in the church. It happened to me. And you can refer to some kind of crazy stories in your life and your drinking, so can I. I remember being drunk at a funeral. Drunk as a lord at a funeral. Followed the coffin into the hole. I tell you, it's real scary when you hear the amens coming from above. But I remember it was an Irish funeral, so they lifted me out and we went back and drank some more. I remember, and this was eventually going to go to the bishop, I remember doing a baptism. Now, you know, I'm not really good with little kids anyway, even today. But when you're drunk, you're terrible, you know. And there were all these people for this baptism. It was 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and I'd just finished having my lunchtime drink. And there was grandmother there, and uncle there, and aunt there, and family there. They're all there, standing around the front with the mother and father with this baby. And then I arrived. And you know what we're like? You know what we're like? We don't need any help. We know what we're doing. We don't need any assistance. I got hold of this baby, and I didn't waste any time. We got right into the service. I baptized this baby without asking anybody. I baptized this baby in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Daphne, the mother, she gave such a scream. She said, Father Leo, it's a little boy. So I don't care what the hell it is, it's Daphne now. She said, is there anything we can do about it? I said, no. Forever and a day, he will be called Daphne. How do you make amends to a thing like that? I should bring him to California. She wrote to the bishop. You know, you got these calls. I wasn't the only one who got these calls. You got these calls. She wrote to the bishop, and I got early in the morning, Monday morning, bishop on the phone. I want to see you, Bruce. Bruce, I want to see you 9 o'clock tomorrow. What does he want? Why is he calling me? What have I done? When I go in to see him, he's got this letter. Yusuf, I've got a letter. I've got a letter. I've got a letter. I said, good. Say it's about you. Then he said, you make a habit. You make a habit of baptizing little boys with girls' names. What's the matter with you? Are you going loopy? Then he said it. And you heard this from a wife, or a husband, a son, or an employer. By the way, a bishop's only an employer dressed in purple. Then he said it. He said, have you been drinking? Have you been drinking, Booth? Now see if you can catch yourself in this. Who? Me? On the Bible, no. But he couldn't prove it. He couldn't prove it. But he didn't believe me. You know, it's real sad when you know they don't believe you. You know, you tell them and they don't believe you. I mean, you know you're lying and they know you're lying. And you know that they know you're lying. But they can't prove it. So I don't know whether you were like me, but I kind of got scared. Because I knew it was true. So I was the kind of alcoholic, and there are many in this room, I could leave it alone. Did you have your disease talk to you? I was driving back, my disease had a little conversation with me. Leo? Leo? He's on to you. Lie low. Lie low. So I didn't have a drink. Didn't have a drink for 3 months. Left it alone for 3 months. And when I left it alone for 3 months, that kind of said to me, I was an alcoholic. If I was an alcoholic, I couldn't leave it alone for 3 months. And I had a Christmas without drinking. Best Christmas we ever had. My family were there. People came to the church. I wasn't misbehaving. It was a great time. But as I said to you, it was the only Christmas I had. Because soon after that, there was to be an incident which was bring my name not only to the bishop, but to many people through the newspaper. I kind of, after I got that Christmas and New Year over, did what I suppose so many alcoholics do. I did well. I felt good about myself, right? And got some friends, some drinking friends, who were going to keep their mouths shut. And go and keep my own little Christmas. And I went to Hove in Sussex, full of old people, a bit like Green Valley, the cemetery. And what happened was I went to Hove and decided that I would go and visit an old lady who was 91, and she was 91 that week. And I'd kind of go in and wish her a happy birthday because I knew her and she knew my family. But always my timing was bad because I'd been drinking, and I'd have been drinking the night before. And although I wasn't drunk, I was in that kind of in-between state, you know. And I kind of banged on the door 6 o'clock in the morning. Because we don't worry about time. Banged on the door. They have these kind of doors where you go like this, you know, with shutters. And some nurse opened the door and said, yes. And I said, it's Father Leo to see Elizabeth. She said, Father, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I said, I don't mind. Anyway, because I had this on, I was dressed like this. I got in. Now, Elizabeth, she's just putting her teeth in. And I go into the bedroom where she is, private little room. Happy birthday, Elizabeth! She says, Father Leo, oh, Father Leo, all right. Said, it's nice to see you, 91, happy birthday for 91. And somewhere in the conversation she got round to it. She said, Father Leo, it's too early to offer you a drink. I said, try me. She offered me a glass of sweet sherry. Oh, I don't drink sweet sherry. I don't like it. But I noticed a bottle of gin behind the bottle of sherry. So I drank the bottle of sherry to get to the bottle of gin. Now, most people don't understand that. But you do. Now, although we all have the disease of alcoholism, some of the symptoms of it come out different. Yeah, some alcoholics, when they get drunk, sing. Some alcoholics fight. Some alcoholics cry. I was a dancing drunk. My mother used to always say, I always tell when you're drunk, you dance. Now, I knew that this 91-year-old lady, she wasn't going to dance with anyone. She was still putting her teeth in. but I heard the sound of what we say in England, a hoover. It's a vacuum cleaner. I thought to myself, where there's a vacuum cleaner, a hoover, there'll be some woman. A kind of domestic cleaning. So I go along the corridor. I've had a few, I've got into that gin, and I want to dance. Now I go wandering off. It's now about 7 o'clock in the morning. Is this lady cleaning the floors? Just doing an ordinary job. She's so happy with her day. Kind of husband's gone to work, kids have gone to school, the sun's in the sky and the birds are twittering in the trees. Little does she know, there's a black blob descending upon her. And I step behind her and I say, in a kind of voice, dance with me. She said, no. I said, dance with me. She said, no, last time. I said, dance with me. And she said, no. So I squeezed her breast. No, 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 not harshly. Gently. Gently. The lady there with tears in her eyes. And she said to me, she said, don't do that. Now, I don't know what kind of alcoholic you were, but if anyone ever said to me, don't do that, I did it again. In fact, I was getting quite good at it. When the police came, I was arrested. 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm in a cell. What kind of a day is this? To start off, to wish a 91-year-old birthday to somebody, happy birthday, to get arrested. God, am I angry. Typical alcoholic day. And I have to go before the courts on assault. Well, I got an attorney. Some of you did. By the way, I know I'm in Mesa, but I'm not the only one who did a bit of that. And those of you who didn't do it, you thought about it. And ladies, you just did it differently. But I'm arrested! I got an attorney, and we go before the judge. Spent some money, got a good attorney. Anyway, the judge, he listened to the attorney, we threw it out. Got a fine. But the press were there. You know those hawks of truth? The press were there. Well, you've heard of Jack the Ripper. Meet Leo the Squeeze. In all the London newspapers. The bishop, he read it. He said, I'm sick of you. I'm sick of you. I'm sick of you. Hey, this bishop, he needed Al-Anon. He said, you're out. You're out. You're finished. I said, why? He said, why? He said, I'm going to give you just one chance. He said, you're going to see a psychiatrist. And he said, I think there's something wrong with you. I went to see this psychiatrist. Some of you may have gone to see a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist said I was depressed. He said I could be schizophrenic. He said I had a problem with my mother. But here's what's scary. Here's what's really scary. He said, you're not alcoholic. And I said to him, would you write that down? And he wrote to the bishop. And he listed a number of things that I could be. It was full of baloney. But he said, this man is not an alcoholic. And what happened was, the bishop, in his wisdom, he said probably what you've heard from other people. He said, I got this letter. He said, it's not for me to argue with this medical man. He said, but I think you've got a very serious drinking problem. And this was over 10 years ago now in England. And he said, I don't want you ever to drink again. Now, what was sad was, it was a good message, but what was sad was, he never talked about treatment, and he certainly never talked about AA. Now, I don't need to tell you that AA is now throughout the world. And thank God it's in my country, England. And you know, there are many, 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 many things that you can be proud of as Americans. Many, many things you can be proud of as Americans. But speaking as a non-American, one of the best things, one of the most creative things, one of the most miraculous things America's ever done for the world is give the world the 12-step program. And I really believe that. Because I believe that the 12-step program, if it was practiced by the churches and politicians and by countries, would bring the world together. Just like it's brought families together, and societies together, and communities together. It really is the key to the world. But in England, you see, 10 years ago, it wasn't very strong. And I don't even know whether this bishop had ever really heard of it. All I know is that I was to be on 9 months or so of hell, which is called dryness. You know, and I think that there are many, and there's a woman here who obviously knows what I'm talking about. But dryness is really hell on earth, because you kind of haven't got a name. I've often said this, and it seems so simple to say, and yet I believe it's so true. Now, today, and for quite a number of years now, I've got a name for what was wrong with me. I'm an alcoholic. But for 9 months, I went through this dry period, and I honestly think dry's not sober. Dry is not sober. And I wasn't drinking, but I was as angry as hell, and I wasn't working a program, and I wasn't dealing with my resentment, and I hadn't had any acceptance. And dry is real appropriate, because it's rather like a dry leaf. You know, like a dry leaf, you rub a dry leaf and it'll snap. See, I think sobriety is about being supple. I think sobriety is about being supple. It's about being able to bend. Remember, it's suggestions only. And we can bend. We go with the flow. We learn to live with days. We learn to live with our problems. Because the bottom line is, if we're sober, it's going to be a good day. But sobriety is supple. Dryness is brittle and sharp. And because it's brittle and because it's sharp, you can break and you can snap and you can get real angry. And there are many people, many people, who even go to meetings and they're kind of still dry. It's like they're not working the program. And they're kind of sitting angry, or they find fault with the smoke, or they find fault with the speaker, or they find fault with the coffee, or they find fault with the toilet roll if you want. But it ain't sobriety. A key to sobriety is about acceptance. And I wasn't there. And I went through 9 months of not drinking. 9 months of not drinking. I was angry as hell. And then one day, isn't it funny how it happens? One day, I was to drink again. And it was my last drink. As I say, it will be 10 years on the 4th of July. 4th of July in England. Next 4th of July, I'll have 10 years. But it was then. And what happened was, I kind of was at home and a telephone call. Well, telephone calls had gone before. And I'd been invited to a 21st. And I really didn't want to go. And I was invited, and the woman who was asking me to go there for her daughter said, "Oh, Father Leo, please come, because my daughter, she really wants you there." Daughter was Jane. And anyway, I went. And I was stood there with my 7-Up. Oh, God, I was fizzed out on 7-Up. Somebody came up to me and they said, "Father Leo," they said, "you look terrific." I said, "I feel terrific." You know that joyous sobriety some people exude? And then somebody came over, and it's, you know, there are no coincidences. This woman was there, and she said, "Father Leo, I knew you when you were in St. Luke's, when you were drinking." And she said, "There's a difference between you now and then." I said, "What's the difference?" She said, "Now you look so bored." And I'll tell you something about dryness. I'll tell you something about dryness, and this is why so many of us can pick it up with some people even in the fellowship. Dryness makes you boring. It makes you boring and it makes you bored. And I thought about what she said, because you kind of think about it afterwards, because all of these are stepping stones to my moment. My moment. When she said this to me, and I've thought about it since, she was absolutely spot on. Why was I bored? And why was I boring? Because I wanted to drink again. Even though I hadn't drank for 9 months, I hadn't accepted that I was an alcoholic, I wasn't working a program, I wasn't going to meetings, and I wanted to drink again. And the opportunity came at that party. She offered me a drink. And I took that drink. And you may be thinking, well, perhaps when he had that drink, that would be it. He'd have about 10. No. Because I remind you again of the big book. It's cunning, baffling, and it's powerful. I had 2 drinks. 2 only, and I went home. And the next morning, I woke up and I'd found that my watch wasn't on my wrist. I'd left my watch in the restroom of the hotel where the 21st party took place. So about 9 o'clock in the morning, I called the barman. I said, George, have you found my watch? I left my watch at the party. He said, I found one in the men's room. I said, it's mine. I said, George, I've got you on the telephone now. I want to talk to you. I said, George, I'm real scared because I had 2 alcoholic drinks. Only 2, but I had 2 alcoholic drinks last night. And I'm scared because if the bishop gets to know... He said, why? He said, Leo, you were great. I've never seen you so relaxed. I said, George, I think the bishop thinks I'm alcoholic. He said, how can you be alcoholic? You had 2 drinks, you went home. I said, you're right, George. And then I said to George, George, you're a barman. You know about these things. But George, do you think I'm alcoholic? He said, you can't be alcoholic. He said, Leo, if you're an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic. And he is. And I go to get my watch. Now, by this time, it's 10 o'clock. Hey, it's the same bar, same barman. Hey, it could have been the same big bottle of gin in the same glass. But something happened to me, and I bet you, it happened to you. When I took that drink that morning, because he said to me, have a drink. And I took that drink, and I knew that 1 or 2 or 22 wasn't going to be enough. I kind of knew. Last night, 2. But it is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And that, for me, is the insight into my alcoholism. I never knew when. I never knew whether one of those nights was going to be the night. I never knew whether it was going to be a time when I'd go home or I wouldn't be home for 3 nights because I'd be on a binge. And that morning it hit me. And I wanted to drink like at times, an alcoholic needs to drink. And I took off my coat, and I took off my collar, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon I was as drunk as a skunk. And I never made it home. Or did I? Perhaps the car crash that was to follow was to bring me home. Because I was in my car, and my car, because I was so drunk, my car hit a tree and hit a lamppost 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 4th of July and shot up through the air. And there were 2 old ladies in a garden because it was near my home, and they said, look, there goes Father Leo. The way he travels. But you don't stay up there. The car crashed. And I got out. And I sat at the side of the road, and I was bleeding. My leg was bleeding. My face was bleeding. And it could have been a very, very, very serious crash. Fortunately, I didn't hit anybody. I just hit the tree and the lamppost, and the car turned over. And I was hurt, but not badly, and I was sitting at the side of the road, and people screamed, and people did their number, and they called for the police, and they called for the ambulance. And I'm sitting down there. I'd done it before. I knew the drill. You sit there, and you wait for the police, and you wait for the ambulance. Except that this was to be a moment for me. And I think everybody who's here must have had a moment. To me, this is my intervention. This is my intervention because I was sitting there and I stepped out of me. I stepped out of me and I saw me. It's a real funny experience I'm describing to you, but it's true. And I can see it now. I can smell the smoke and I can taste the blood. And I looked at me and I saw me, and in very simple words, I didn't like what was happening to me, and I didn't like what I was becoming. I had a moment. Remember that little Jewish girl? Your eyes are opened and you see. You see in a way you've never seen before, not only who you are, but what you need. I saw me. And I knew I needed help. And I picked up the telephone and I called the bishop, and it was the scariest telephone call I've ever made. And he must have sensed a difference. He must have sensed something close to whatever surrender might mean at that stage. And I went into treatment. But the biggest thing I want to say to you is, in treatment I was sent to AA. And I've got to tell you, I never struggled. As soon as I came to AA, I kind of heard. I suppose it was because I was so demoralized, and I kind of was so hurt, and I was looking for any way, because I knew I was losing. I really knew I was losing. And I heard from a Jewish woman my story, and I heard for a young guy who'd never been to church and never would, I don't suppose, my story. And in those little rooms, and in those days, you know, I had to go on a bicycle because the courts took my license away for 2 years. I lost my license for 2 years. And I had to cycle about 3 or 4 miles to an AA meeting in England. And I went to a number of these meetings. And that wet rain and that cycling and was all part of what I had to do to stay sober. It was all part of my surrender. I can see it now. God knows I didn't like it, but I did it. And I heard my story. And I've never left. I've never left. And it's changed me. God knows I need to change more. But it's changed me. And I'll tell you what it's done. I'll tell you what it's done. It's given me a God that I never had before. You are the first people to ever say to me, you have a God as you understand him. Now you must remember, I've been brought up by the church, and I've been brought up as a theologian, I've been brought up as a philosopher, but I'd always had somebody else's God. And it was never real. Honestly, it was never real. I learned the prayers, and I learned how to do it, and I knew how to do it. I learned the words. I learned the game. Because just like doctors have a language, and just like attorneys have a language, priests and clergy have a language too. I knew the game, I learned the game. But it was never real. You gave me a God because you hit me right between the eyes and you said, you've got to have a God as you understand him. And I found that here. I found that God was bigger than a church. And I found God in the hugs, and the 12-step calls, and the telephone calls that I made, and the sponsor who really had never been to university, but my God, he knew about lies and he knew about manipulation. And he got me every time. I remember he turned around and he said to me, and I'd never heard it ever said to me before. He said, you know, Leo, he said, you're full of shit. Nobody had ever said that. And I was angry as hell. In fact, I was going to fire him. But you know, I realized he was right. You see, because in a sense, I hadn't just used alcohol. You see, and I think that's what so many of us get in touch with, because it's only the first step that refers to alcohol. All the other steps are about changing our attitudes and changing our behavior. It's a kind of life change. And unless that happens, you never feel comfortable here. But what I saw was I didn't just use alcohol. I used God, and I used the church, and I used doctrine, and I used the Bible to hide. To hide from me. And you made me come home. You made me come home to me. And there was something else you said, and I want to share it with you while I've got some time. You kind of said to me that you have to turn your life. You have to turn your life in a new direction. And for a long time, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I kind of got into this business of handing it over. And I kind of got so busy into handing it over, I'd forgotten that the step talks about turning your life. Turning your life in a new direction, but you have the responsibility to turn it. You have to work the steps. The steps aren't written in a book or put on a wall. The steps aren't written. And the steps aren't just talked about. The steps are to be lived. And I know that if they're going to be lived, and if those steps are ever going to be taken, I know that I have to take them. And it's kind of like I am responsible for turning my life. It's really unfair, and it's an abuse of God to kind of expect him to do it, because he's created us with such glorious freedom. But with that freedom is such terrible responsibility. And so many of us know it because we're free. Some of us go out again. You're free to drink. I remember once somebody turning around to me and saying, you know, I'm an alcoholic and I can't drink. And I said, of course you can. That's the problem. If you couldn't drink, there wouldn't be a problem. But it's because you can. And every day of our lives we can. The issue is whether we choose to. That's the miracle of this program. It's real clear. And I think it's with all the programs. It's real clear. If you want what we have, you will be prepared to do what we did. You make the steps. You make the amends. You do that moral inventory that was read to us, but you do it. And then you will experience a spiritual awakening. And I believe with that spiritual awakening, and it's only my view that I share with you, I believe that just as in the first step we were powerless and unmanageable when we took the drug, so we find as we work this program that we get in touch with a power that we never thought we had, and our lives become manageable. We turn it all around, and I think that's what we mean when we say we're winners and losers. The winners have kind of, by their efforts and by their steps, they've made a move. I do a lot of talking about spirituality, and I'm convinced about one thing: it ain't religion. I'm absolutely convinced about that. And the wisdom 50 years ago of those early men who formed this program, who said, no way are we going with a religious approach, we're going with a spiritual program. And that means that there are people of other religions, and I know them, thank God I'm fortunate enough to know them. Jewish people. People who are from other religions and other backgrounds, and have seen them in many parts of the world, and they're working this same program. And somehow or other the world learns to hold hands again. And there are people in this room, different backgrounds, different traditions, different faiths, different denominations, but somehow here we can hold hands and be one. Because spirituality is about discovering God in our lives. And I found all that here, in these rooms. I can tell you, this program has never been a difficulty for me with my religion. But I do know that spirituality is more than that. Much more than that. And I believe it helps me to understand people who are different to me. And I'm learning to accept people who are different to me. And I know that if I'm going to be friendly, I've kind of got to say, hello. I can say hello, or I can ignore you. I can say a kind word, or I can be cruel. And the thing that scares me is, and I know that it must scare you, is that there's something about gossip that I hate. Because I honestly think that gossip is rather like I used to be when I drank. It's a character assassination of somebody else who ain't there. And I think that the person who listens to the gossip is just as bad as the person who's gossiping. It takes two to tango, and it takes two to gossip. This program is about being straightforward men and women. And somehow or other that works. And I think you find God here. That moment, that car crash made me see my life. And somebody said to me, do you think that was a special moment? I actually think that God was showering moments many, many times. But that moment, I grabbed and I held on to. And it's led to an appreciation of many, many more. Now I can find God in friendships and in music, in retreats by the water where I live in Long Beach. And I can find Him in church too. But I know that God is not a prisoner of the church. And I really do believe it's to be found in His world. That moment when I saw me was such a new beginning for me. And not so many months ago, I was in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was sharing in Atlanta, Georgia, and a young man came over to me, and he'd heard my story, and he was shaking me by the hand. You know, like people come over and thank you. And he said, Father Leo, he says, I'm a cocaine addict. I said, nice to see you, nice to meet you. He said, my name's David. I said, nice to see you, David. He said, you know that moment you had? I said, yeah. He said, do you think that moment can only come with a car crash? And I said, no, David, no. I said, I think there are many ways in which you catch yourself. He says, I'm so glad you said that because you know, he says, now I see. He says, I've been in the program CA now for 9 months. He said, and I see that I had a moment too. And it wasn't a car crash, but it was the same. He said, Leo, he said, I was hurting for cocaine. You know, and I'd sold and I'd cheated my parents. And he said, I'd stolen and I would have sold myself for cocaine. You know, because I needed it. And he said, I was really hurting. And then one day he said, I had the radio on. You know, and I've had the radio on before. And he said, you know, like sometimes you hear a thing. And you've heard this thing 1,000 times before, but this time you hear it. This time you hear it. He said, well, there was a song. He said, and this song spoke to me. It kind of brought me to my knees. And until you shared your car crash, I'd never seen the connection. He said, but I want to tell you about it because he said it was sung by an English group. And he said, I tell you, he said, it was my moment. I said, David, what was the moment? Because if you tell me, I'm going to share it with others. Just like I shared my car crash. And he told me. The words of this song helped David. Who knows, they may help some of you. But it's the same thing. He said when he was hurting for cocaine on the radio, an English group sang, when I was a young man, so much younger than today, I never needed anybody's help in any way. But now those days are gone. I'm not so self-assured. Now I find I've changed my mind and I've opened up the door. So help me. Help me if you can. I'm feeling down. And I do appreciate you being around. Help me get my feet back on the ground. Won't you please help me? And he said, Leo, he says, there was help for me. And I says, David, I know. Because there was help for me. And I know that at some level, that's what you found too. A song, a car crash, a wife or a husband saying something, an employer saying something, but somewhere along the line, something happened to us that brought us to this place, that brought us home. And today, we have so much. I don't know whether you'd say it the same way, but today, I can live again. Hey, and today, I can love again. And perhaps the biggest gift of all, today, I'm able to laugh again. Thanks very much for listening.